I got detained in a hotel parking lot by a guy who said he was a cop, except he wasn't. The real police showed up and backed him instead of me, and for a few minutes there, I honestly thought I was the crazy one, like reality had tilted sideways and nobody else noticed. Yeah, that happened, and I'm telling you right now, if I hadn't recorded the whole thing, I probably wouldn't believe it myself either. What messes with me isn't just what he did, it's how close it came to working, how easy it is for somebody with confidence and a vest to step into authority, and people just go along with it. So let me walk you through it the way it actually unfolded, because the details matter, the tone matters, the pauses matter, all those tiny human moments you can't fake. It was late afternoon, gray sky, one of those dull days where everything looks washed out and quiet. I'd pulled into this roadside hotel lot just to stop for a minute, check something on my camera, mount, stretch my legs, nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious, just a guy in a car taking a breather. My vehicle used to be part of a government fleet years ago, not a police car. Just the same model departments sometimes use, and it still had the manufacturer badge on the trunk that says Interceptor small factory letters, totally normal if you know cars, which I do. I'm sitting there minding my own business when an SUV rolls up and stops right in front of me, angled, deliberate, blocking my path like someone placing a chair in front of a door. At first I figured it was a mistake, maybe he didn't realize he boxed me in. But then the driver door opens and this guy steps out wearing a tactical vest radio clipped to his shoulder, posture stiff like he practiced it in a mirror. He walks up and says, "Couple questions for you." No greeting, no introduction, just authority dropped into the air like a badge. I looked at him and said, "About what?" And he nods toward my car and asks, "How dark are your windows?" Not hello, not who are you, straight to interrogation. I told him they were legal, calm voice, no attitude. And he says, "That's not what I asked. How dark are they?" That tone hit me right away. You know what I mean? The tone people use when they want you to feel small before they even have a reason. So I asked why he was asking, and he says it's because I'm driving a vehicle that looks like a police car. I glanced back at the trunk, saw the tiny badge, and said, "It's just the model name." But he ignored that and asked if I was an officer. I said no, then asked if he was, and without hesitation he goes, "Yes." Not joking, not smiling, just yes, like he'd said it 100 times before. I tilted my head and asked, "You're a police officer," and he says I'm licensed as one. That phrase stuck in my head immediately, licensed as one, because real cops don't talk like that. They either are or they aren't. So I asked him for ID, simple request. If you claim authority, you show proof, right? That's basic, and he refused. Flat out said he didn't need to show me anything. That's when the gears started turning in my mind, slow but loud, because something didn't line up. His tone said authority, but his behavior said performance. Then I realized his SUV was still parked right in front of me, blocking me completely, and I asked him, "Am I being detained?" He didn't answer, just stared, so I asked again, "Am I being detained?" And he nodded yes. Didn't say, it just nodded, like that gesture alone carried power. That moment felt like the air changed temperature, like the conversation stepped across an invisible line. I asked him slowly, "You're detaining me," and he crosses his arms and says he can place me under citizen's arrest if he needs to. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was surreal. Citizen's arrest isn't something you toss out casually. That's a legal claim that requires an actual crime. So I asked him what crime, and he had nothing, just silence and attitude. I told him to move his vehicle so I could leave, and he said no, just no, like he was used to people obeying that word. At that point, I called the real police, not angry, not yelling, just calm, because when someone blocks your car and says they're a cop, you document it. While we waited, I kept talking to him, and the more he talked, the more his story shifted. One minute he's a cop, next he's licensed, next he's security, next he doesn't need ID. It kept changing, like he was trying on roles to see which one fit. Eventually the patrol cars showed up, real uniforms, real badges, and for a few seconds I felt relief, like okay, now this gets sorted out. I explained everything, told them he said he was a cop and detained me. And one officer looked at him and said, "You told him you were a police officer." The guy shrugs and says he told me he was licensed, and the officer nods and says, "That's a problem." Hearing that felt like oxygen, like finally someone else saw what I saw. But then the conversation drifted sideways. Instead of asking why he blocked me, the officer turns to me and asks if I'm staying at the hotel. I blinked and said, "That's not the issue. He detained me," and the officer repeats the question about whether I'm staying there. That's when the frustration started creeping in, slow and hot, because I could feel the focus shifting away from the actual problem. I said again that the guy blocked my car and told me I was detained, and the officer shrugs and says he doesn't know that I was detained. I told him. The guy nodded yes when I asked, and the officer says maybe he was making a citizen's arrest. I actually laughed at that like a short burst of disbelief and asked for what crime. The officer said he didn't know. Think about that for a second. Nobody knew what crime had been committed, but somehow I was the one being questioned. The air got heavy after that, not loud, not dramatic, just thick with that uncomfortable feeling when something's clearly off, but nobody wants to say it outright. I pulled up the video on my camera and showed them the clip where the guy says he's a cop clear as day, and the officer watched it, scratched his chin, and said, "Well, he didn't say he was acting as a police officer." That sentence right there flipped a switch inside me because suddenly it wasn't about what happened, it was about how it could be interpreted. I asked him calmly what a reasonable person would think if someone said they were a cop, blocked their car, and said they were detained, and he didn't answer, just looked back at the guard. That silence felt louder than anything said all afternoon. Minutes passed with them talking back and forth, the guard's story shifting again, and finally I asked what the plan was, whether they were going to arrest him or not. The officer sighed like I'd asked him to solve a puzzle he didn't want to touch, and said, "For what crime?" I told him. "False imprisonment, illegal detention." And he rubbed his forehead and said he didn't know the statute. I thought he was joking, but he wasn't. So I told him there's a computer in his car and he could look it up. And after a long pause, he said he'd check and walked back to his cruiser. That was it. That was the ending. No arrest, no citation, just uncertainty floating around like dust in sunlight. The guard stood off to the side, acting like nothing happened. The officers talked quietly by their car, and I stood there thinking how strange it was that the only person who seemed bothered by what happened was me. I drove away feeling relieved it was over, but unsettled at the same time because the whole thing showed me how fragile authority can look when it's fake and how strong it can feel when people assume it's real. It wasn't about a decal or a parking lot. It was about power, about how fast someone can step into it and how slow others can be to question it. And honestly, the part that stuck with me most wasn't the guy pretending, it was how hesitant the real authorities were to confront it, like they were waiting for permission that never came. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't asked questions, if I'd just accepted it, if I'd assumed he had the right to tell me what to do, because that's how these moments work. They hinge on whether someone pushes back or stays quiet. So now I want to ask you something, and I really mean it. If you were in that situation, blocked and told you were detained by someone claiming authority, would you comply or would you challenge it? Was that guard out of line? Were the officers too lenient? Or was this just a weird misunderstanding blown out of proportion? Tell me what you think. Drop your perspective, your experiences, even stories you've seen yourself. Because conversations like this are how people figure out where the line actually is.